Hello everyone and welcome to Medford Anywhere Learning TV. We're glad you're tuned in. We want to give a shout out to our friends at Southern Oregon PBS, KTVL, KDRV, and the Dove Network. Thank you for hosting us on your station. In the Medford School District, we have one shared vision, and that we believe that all are learning, and learning is for all. And what better place to do that than right here on Medford Anywhere Learning TV.
Hello, my name is Jamie Leach. I'm an English teacher at North Medford High School, and today I'm going to read for you one of my favorite books for young people called Sarah, Plain and Tall by Patricia MacLachlan. Let's get started. Patricia MacLachlan actually wrote this book based on stories that her mother told her about a friend. So it comes from real life stories. A lot of times stories come from our real life. So I hope you will enjoy Sarah, Plain and Tall. Did Mama sing every day? Asked Caleb. Every single day? He sat close to the fire, his chin in his hand. It was dusk, and the dogs lay beside him on the warm hearthstones. Every single day, I told him, for the second time this week, for the 20th time this month, for the 100th time this year, and the past few years. And did Papa sing too? Yes, Papa sang too. Don't get so close, Caleb. You'll heat up. He pushed his chair back. It made a hollow scraping sound on the hearthstones, and the dogs stirred. Lottie, small and black, wagged her tail and lifted her head. Nick slept on. I turned the bread dough over and over on the marble slab on the kitchen table. Well, Papa doesn't sing any more, said Caleb very softly. A log broke apart and crackled in the fireplace. He looked up at me. What did I look like when I was born? You didn't have any clothes on, I told him. I know that, he said. You looked like this. I held the bread dough up in a round, pale ball. I had hair, said Caleb seriously. Not enough to talk about, I said. And she named me Caleb, he went on, filling in the old familiar story. I would have named you Troublesome, I said, making Caleb smile. And Mama handed me to you in the yellow blanket and said, he waited for me to finish the story, and said, I sighed. And Mama said, isn't he beautiful, Anna? And I was, Caleb finished. Caleb thought the story was over, and I didn't tell him what I really thought. He was homely and plain, and he had a terrible holler and a horrid smell. But these were not the worst of him. Mama died the next morning. That was the worst thing about Caleb. Isn't he beautiful, Anna? Her last words to me. I had gone to bed thinking how wretched he looked, and I forgot to say good night. I wiped my hands on my apron and went to the window. Outside, the prairie reached out and touched the places where the sky came down. Though winter was nearly over, there were patches of snow and ice everywhere. I looked at the long dirt road that crawled across the plains, remembering the morning that Mama had died, cruel and sunny. They had come for her in a wagon and taken her away to be buried. And then the cousins and aunts and uncles had come and tried to fill up the house. But they couldn't. Slowly, one by one, they left. And then the days seemed long and dark, like winter days, even though it wasn't winter. And Papa didn't sing. Isn't he beautiful, Anna? No, Mama. It was hard to think of Caleb as beautiful. It took 3 whole days for me to love him, sitting in the chair by the fire, Papa washing up the supper dishes, Caleb's tiny hand brushing my cheek, and a smile. It was the smile, I know. Can you remember her songs? Asked Caleb. Mama's songs? I turned from the window. No, only that she sang about flowers and birds, sometimes about the moon at nighttime. Caleb reached down and touched Lottie's head. Maybe, he said, his voice low, if you remember the songs, then I might remember her too. My eyes widened and tears came. Then the door opened and the wind blew in with Papa, and I went to stir the stew. Papa put his arms around me and put his nose in my hair. "Nice soapy smell, that stew," he said. I laughed. "That's my hair." Caleb came over and threw his arms around Papa's neck and hung down as Papa swung him back and forth and the dogs sat up. "Cold in town," Papa said. And Jack was feisty. Jack was Papa's horse that he'd raised from a colt. "Rascal," murmured Papa, smiling, because no matter what Jack did, Papa loved him. I spooned up the stew and lighted the oil lamp, and we ate with the dogs crowding under the table, hoping for spills and handouts. Papa might not have told us about Sarah that night if Caleb hadn't asked him the question. After the dishes were cleared and washed, Papa was filling the tin pail with ashes. Caleb spoke up. It wasn't a question, really. "You don't sing anymore," he said. He said it harshly, not because he meant to, but because he'd been thinking about it for so long. "Why?" he asked more gently. Slowly, Papa straightened up. There was a long silence, and the dogs looked up, wondering at it. "I've forgotten the old songs," Papa said quietly. He sat down. "But maybe there's a way to remember them." He looked up at us. "How?" asked Caleb eagerly. Papa leaned back in the chair. "I've placed an advertisement in the newspapers for help." "You mean a housekeeper?" I asked, surprised. Caleb and I looked at each other and burst out laughing, remembering Hilly, our old housekeeper. She was round and slow and shuffling. She snored in a high whistle at night, like a tea kettle, and let the fire go out. "No," said Papa slowly, "not a housekeeper." He paused. "A wife." Caleb stared at Papa. "A wife? You mean a mother?" Nick slid his face into Papa's lap, and Papa stroked his ears. "That too," said Papa, "like Maggie." Matthew, our neighbor to the south, had written to ask for a wife and mother for his children, and Maggie had come from Tennessee. Her hair was the color of turnips, and she laughed. Papa reached into his pocket and unfolded a letter on white paper. "And I have received an answer," Papa read to us. "Dear Mr. Jacob Whitting, I am Sarah Wheaton from Maine, as you will see from my letter. I am answering your advertisement. I have never been married, though I have been asked. I have lived with an older brother, William, who is about to be married. His wife-to-be is young and energetic. I've always loved to live by the sea, but at this time I feel a move is necessary. And the truth is, the sea is as far east as I can go. My choice, as you can see, is limited. This should not be taken as an insult. I am strong and work hard, and I am willing to travel. But I am not mild-mannered. If you should still care to write, I would be interested in your children and about where you live, and you. Very truly yours, Sarah Elizabeth Wheaton. P.S. Do you have opinions on cats? I have one." No one spoke when Papa finished the letter. He kept looking at it in his hands, reading it over to himself. Finally, I turned my head a bit to sneak a look at Caleb. He was smiling. I smiled too. "One thing," I said in the quiet of the room. "What's that?" asked Papa, looking up. I put my arm around Caleb. "Ask her if she sings," I said. Caleb and Papa and I wrote letters to Sarah, and before the ice and snow had melted from the fields, we all received answers. Mine came first. Dear Anna, yes, I can braid hair and I can make stew and bake bread, though I prefer to build bookshelves and paint. My favorite colors are the colors of the sea, blue and gray and green, depending on the weather. My brother William is a fisherman, and he tells me that when he is in the middle of a fog-bound sea, the water is the color for which there is no name. He catches flounder and sea bass and bluefish. Sometimes he sees whales, and birds too, of course. I am enclosing a book of seabirds, so you will see what William and I see every day. Very truly yours, Sarah Elizabeth Wheaton. Caleb read and read the letter so many times that the ink began to run and the folds tore. He read the book about seabirds over and over. "Do you think she'll come?" asked Caleb. "And will she stay? What if she thinks we are loud and pesky?" "You are loud and pesky," I told him. But I was worried too. Sarah loved the sea, I could tell. Maybe she wouldn't leave there after all to come where there were fields and grass and sky and not much else. "What if she comes and doesn't like our house?" Caleb asked. I told her it was small. Maybe I shouldn't have told her it was small. "Hush, Caleb, hush." Caleb's letter came soon after, with a picture of a cat drawn on the envelope. "Dear Caleb, my cat's name is Seal because she is gray like the seals that swim offshore in Maine. She is glad that Lottie and Nick send their greetings. She likes dogs most of the time. She says their footprints are much larger than hers, which she is enclosing in return. Your house sounds lovely, even though it is far out in the country with no close neighbors. My house is tall, and the shingles are gray because of the salt from the sea. There are roses nearby. Yes, I do like small rooms sometimes. Yes, I can keep a fire going at night. I do not know if I snore. Seal has never told me. Very truly yours, Sarah Elizabeth." "Did you really ask her about fires and snoring?" I asked, amazed. "I wish to know," Caleb said. He kept the letter with him, reading it in the barn and in the fields and by the cow pond, and always in bed at night. One morning early, Caleb and I were coming out of the horse stalls and putting down new bedding. Papa stopped suddenly, leaned on his pitchfork. "Sarah has said she will come for a month's time if we wish her to," he said. His voice was loud in the dark barn. "To see how it is. Just to see." Caleb stood by the stall door and folded his arms across his chest. "I think," he began. Then, "I think," he said slowly, "that it would be good to say yes." He finished with a rush. Papa looked at me. "Yes, I say," I told him, grinning. "Yes," said Papa, "then yes it is." And the three of us, all smiling, went to work again. The next day, Papa went to town to mail his letter to Sarah. It was rainy for days, and the clouds followed. The house was cool and damp and quiet. Once I set 4 places at the table, then caught myself and put the extra plate away. 3 lambs were born, one with a black face. And then Papa's letters came. It was very short. "Dear Jacob, I will come by train. I will wear a yellow bonnet. I am plain and tall. Sarah." "What's that?" asked Caleb excitedly, peering over Papa's shoulder. He pointed. "There, written at the bottom of the letter." Papa read it to himself. Then he smiled, holding the letter up for us to see. "Tell them I sing," was all it said. Sarah came in the spring. She came through green grass fields that bloomed with Indian paintbrush, red and orange, and blue-eyed grass. Papa got up early for the long day's trip to the train and back. He brushed his hair so slick and shiny that Caleb laughed. He wore a clean blue shirt and a belt instead of suspenders. He fed and watered the horses, talking to them as he hitched them up to the wagon. Old Bess, calm and kind. Jack, wild-eyed, reaching over to nip Bess on the neck. "Clear day, Bess," said Papa, rubbing her nose. "Settle down, Jack." He leaned his head on Jack. And then Papa drove off along the dirt road to fetch Sarah, Papa's new wife. Maybe our new mother. Gophers ran back and forth across the road, stopping to stand up and watch the wagon. Far off in the field, a woodchuck ate and listened. Caleb and I did our chores without talking. We shoveled out the stalls and laid down new hay. We fed the sheep. We swept and straightened and carried wood and water. And then our chores were done. Caleb pulled on my shirt. "Is my face clean?" he asked. "Can my face be too clean?" He looked alarmed. "No, your face is clean, but not too clean," I said. Caleb slipped his hand into mine as we stood on the porch, watching the road. He was afraid. "Will she be nice?" he asked. "Like Maggie?" "Sarah will be nice," I told him. "How far away is Maine?" he asked. "You know how far. Far away, by the sea." "Will Sarah bring some sea?" he asked. "No, you cannot bring the sea." The sheep ran in the field, and far off the cows moved slowly to the pond, like turtles. "Will she like us?" asked Caleb very softly. I watched a marsh hawk wheel down behind the barn. He looked up at me. "Of course she will like us," he answered his own question. "We are nice," he added, making me smile. We waited and watched. I rocked on the porch, and Caleb rolled a marble on the wood floor. Back and forth, back and forth. The marble was blue. We saw the dust from the wagon first, rising above the road, above the heads of Jack and old Bess. Caleb climbed up onto the porch roof and shaded his eyes. "A bonnet!" he cried. "I see a yellow bonnet!" The dogs came out from under the porch, ears up, their eyes on the cloud of dust bringing Sarah. The wagon passed the fence field, and the cows and sheep looked up too. It rounded the windmill and the barn and the windbreak of Russian olive that Mama had planted long ago. Nick began to bark, then Lottie, and the wagon clattered into the yard and stopped by the steps. "Hush," Papa said to the dogs, and it was quiet. Sarah stepped down from the wagon, a cloth bag in her hand. She reached up and took off her yellow bonnet, smoothing back her brown hair into a bun. She was plain and tall. "Did you bring some sea?" asked Caleb beside me. "Something from the sea," said Sarah, smiling. "And me." She turned and lifted a black case from the wagon. "And Seal, too." Carefully she opened the case, and Seal, gray with white feet, stepped out. Lottie lay down, her head on her paws, staring. Nick leaned down to sniff. Then he lay down too. "The cat will be good in the barn," said Papa, "for mice." Sarah smiled. "She will be good in the house too." Sarah took Caleb's hand, then mine. Her hands were large and rough. She gave Caleb a shell. A moon snail, she called it, that was curled and smelled of salt. "The gulls fly high and drop the shells on the rocks below," she told Caleb. "When the shell is broken, they eat what is inside." "That is very smart," said Caleb. "For you, Anna," said Sarah, "a sea stone." And she gave me the smoothest, whitest stone I had ever seen. The sea washes over and around the stone, rolling it until it is round and perfect. "That is very smart too," said Caleb. He looked up at Sarah. "We do not have the sea here." Sarah turned and looked out over the plains. "No," she said, "there is no sea here, but the land rolls a little, like the sea." My father did not see her look, but I did, and I knew that Caleb had seen it too. Sarah was not smiling. She was already lonely. In a month's time, the preacher might come to marry Sarah and Papa, and a month was a long time. Time enough for her to change her mind and leave us. Papa took Sarah's bags inside, where her room was ready with a quilt on the bed and blue flax dried in a vase on the night table. Seal stretched and made a small cat sound. I watched her circle the dogs and sniff the air. Caleb came out and stood beside me. "When will we sing?" he whispered. I shook my head, turning the white stone over and over in my hand. I wished everything was as perfect as the stone. I wished that Papa and Caleb and I were perfect for Sarah. I wished we had a sea of our own. The dogs loved Sarah first. Lottie slept beside her bed, curled in a soft circle, and Nick leaned his face on the covers in the morning, watching for the first sign that Sarah was awake. No one knew where Seal slept. Seal was a roamer. Sarah's collection of shells sat on the windowsill. A scallop, she told us, picking up the shells one by one. A sea clam, an oyster, a razor clam, and a conch shell. If you put it to your ear, you can hear the sea. She put it to Caleb's ear, then mine. Papa listened too. Then Sarah listened once more, with a look so sad and far away that Caleb leaned against me. "At least Sarah can hear the sea," he whispered. Papa was quiet and shy with Sarah, and so was I, but Caleb talked to Sarah from morning until the light left the sky. "Where are you going?" he asked. "To do what?" "To pick flowers," said Sarah. "I'll hang some of them upside down and dry them so they'll keep some color. And we can have flowers all winter long." "I'll come too," cried Caleb. "Sarah said winter," he said to me. "That means Sarah will stay." Together we picked flowers, paintbrush and clover and prairie violets. There were buds on the wild roses that climbed up the paddock fence. "The roses will bloom in early summer," I told Sarah. I looked to see if she knew what I was thinking. Summer was when the wedding would be, might be, Sarah and Papa's wedding. We hung the flowers from the ceiling in little bunches. "I've never seen this before," said Sarah. "What is it called?" "Bride's bonnet," I told her. Caleb smiled at the name. "We don't have this by the sea," she said. "We have seaside goldenrod and wild asters and woolly ragwort." "Woolly ragwort," Caleb whooped. He made up a song. "Woolly ragwort all around, woolly ragwort on the ground, woolly ragwort grows and grows, woolly ragwort in your nose." Sarah and Papa laughed. The dogs lifted their heads and thumped their tail against the wood floor. Seal sat on the kitchen chair and watched us with yellow eyes. We ate Sarah's stew, the light coming through the windows. Papa had baked bread that was still warm from the fire. "The stew is fine," said Papa. "Yep," Sarah nodded. "The bread, too." "What does yep mean?" asked Caleb. "In Maine, it means yes," said Sarah. "Do you want more stew?" "Yep," said Caleb. "Yep," echoed my father. After dinner, Sarah told us about William. He has a gray and white boat named Kittiwake. She looked out the window. "That is a small gull found way off the shore where William fishes. There are 3 aunts who live near us. They wear silk dresses and no shoes. You would love them." "Yep," Caleb said. "Does your brother look like you?" I asked. "Yes," said Sarah. "He is plain and tall." At dusk, Sarah cut Caleb's hair on the front steps, gathering his curls and scattering them on the fence and ground. Seal batted some hair around the porch as the dogs watched. "Why?" asked Caleb. "For the birds," said Sarah. "They will use it for their nests. Later we can look for nests of curls." "Sarah said later," Caleb whispered to me as we spread his hair about. "Sarah will stay." Sarah cut Papa's hair too. No one else saw, but I found him behind the barn, tossing the pieces of hair into the wind for the birds. Sarah brushed my hair and tied it up in back with a rose velvet ribbon she had brought from Maine. She brushed hers long and free and tied it back too. We stood side by side, looking into the mirror. I looked taller, like Sarah, and fair and thin, and with my hair pulled back, I looked a little like her daughter, Sarah's daughter. And then it was time for singing. Sarah sang us a song we had never heard before as we sat on the porch, insects buzzing in the dark, the rustle of cows in the grasses. It was called "Summer is a-Comin' In," and she taught it to us all, even Papa, who sang as if he had never stopped singing. "Summer is a-coomin' in, lood sing coo you." "What's a summer?" asked Caleb. He said it "soomer," the way Sarah had said it. "Summer," said Papa and Sarah at the same time. Caleb and I looked at each other. Summer was coming. "Tomorrow," said Sarah, "I want to see the sheep. You know I've never touched one." "Never?" Caleb sat up. "Never," said Sarah. She smiled and leaned back in her chair. "But I've touched seals, real seals. They are cool and slippery, and they slide through the water like fish. They can cry and sing, and sometimes they bark, a little like dogs." Sarah barked like a seal, and Lottie and Nick came running from the barn to jump on Sarah and lick her face and make her laugh. Sarah stroked them and scratched their ears, and it was quiet again. "I wish I could touch a seal right now," said Caleb, his voice soft in the night. "So do I," said Sarah. She sighed. Then she began to sing the summer song again. Far off in a field, a meadowlark sang too. The sheep made Sarah smile. She sank her fingers into their thick, coarse wool. She talked to them, running with the lambs, letting them suck on her fingers. She named them after her favorite aunts, Harriet and Mattie and Lou. And she lay down in the field beside them and sang, "Summer is a-comin' in," her voice drifting over the meadow grasses, carried by the wind. She cried when we found a lamb that had died, and she shouted and shook her fat fist at the turkey buzzards that came from nowhere to eat it. She would not let Caleb or me come near. And that night, Papa went with a shovel to bury the sheep and a lantern to bring Sarah back. She sat on the porch alone. Nick crept up to lean against her knees. After dinner, Sarah drew pictures to send home to Maine. She began a charcoal drawing of the fields, like the sea, rolling like the sea rolled. She drew a sheep whose ears were too big, and she drew a windmill. "Windmill was my first word," said Caleb. "Papa told me so." "Mine was flower," I said. "What was yours, Sarah?" "Dune," said Sarah. "Dune?" Caleb looked up. "In Maine," said Sarah, "there are rock cliffs that rise up at the edge of the sea, and there are hills covered with pine and spruce trees, green with needles. But William and I found a sand dune all our own. It was soft and sparkling with bits of mica. When we were little, we would slide down the dune into the water." Caleb looked out the window. "We have no dunes here," he said. Papa stood up. "Yes, we do," he said. He took the lantern and went out the door to the barn. "We do?" Caleb called after him. He ran ahead, and Sarah and I following, the dogs close behind. Next to the barn was Papa's mound of hay for bedding, nearly half as tall as the barn, covered with canvas to keep the rain from rotting it. Papa carried the wooden ladder from the barn and leaned it against the hay. "There," he said, smiling at Sarah, "our dune." Thank you for watching Anywhere Learning TV. Enjoy today.
Thanks for tuning in to Medford Anywhere Learning TV. Medford School District is a place where all are learning, and learning is for all.